Hi, everyone, and welcome again to Msingi Talks, the first episode of the year. We are shooting this on Valentine's Day, and so it's Happy Valentine's, pre-Valentine's, late Valentine's. I don't know what it is, but I hope there's love in your heart, love in your soul, love everywhere. I'm very honored today to be hosting Reverend Tim Costello. Karibu sana. I hope you've heard that
I have
already.
Jumbo
Yes.
Asante.
Karibu sana. Tim is a dear friend and also a friend of a friend, and it's an honor to host you today. And we are going to be talking about a lot of things. But before we do that, could you please introduce yourself to the people?
Sure. Well,
Yes.
there's certainly love in my heart, though I did forget
Yes.
to send a message to my wife until someone reminded me. She's in Australia. So
Okay.
46 years of marriage could have ended if I hadn't remembered in time. It was Valentine's Day.
Yes.
So I'm an Australian. I have been a lawyer, a minister, a mayor of a city in Australia. I've been the CEO of World Vision Australia, which is a very large Christian NGO.
Yeah.
Currently, I'm the executive director of Micro Australia. So that really mobilises the church on behalf of the world's poor in giving and aid and greater equality for the world's poor. So that's what I do.
All right. It's such an honor to be here with you. And actually, one of the reasons that we have engaged more personally is because we're part of the Sojourners Advisory Board as well.
Sojourners is a wonderful organisation, been going 50 years. Its founder, Jim Wallace, and his wife and son were in Australia having Christmas holidays with me. So that's where we met, and it's a voice for faith and justice in America.
Yes. Cool. So before we go into the meat of the podcast, of the conversation, I'll always ask these two questions of my guests. One, what brings you joy? And also, what brings you deep sorrow?
Yeah, joy is very different to happiness. When you seek happiness, you never seem to find it.
Yeah.
I've found that joy comes in surprising moments, a moment of wonder, of beauty when I'm in the environment, a look and a smile from a friend that's deeply caring, and this isn't just being superficial. When my 6-year-old granddaughter Winnie gives me a hug and says, "I love you." And I think it comes out of service. Soren Kierkegaard, a great theologian, said, "The door to happiness turns outwards." When you're always turning inwards and thinking about yourself and feeling bitter that you're overlooked or forgotten or hurt and having resentments, you don't have joy. When you turn outwards and give, serve, it's surprising how much joy is there. So that would be my experience.
All right. And what brings you sorrow?
Well, sorrow is the grief, and I'm feeling it in great dollops of heaviness at the moment, that the sense of a world that was committed to greater transparency and democracy and justice is at the moment spitting into a wind, a gale going the other way.
Yeah.
Moving to authoritarian leaders who are closing down programs, humanitarian programs, who are saying our purpose is for the strong to get stronger and the weak to get weaker.
Yeah.
And I feel like this hurricane is really blowing, and I didn't feel this even 5 years ago. It's a zeitgeist that is really disturbing for me. So I have great sorrow that a lot of my life's work, in many ways, I'm seeing not being completely overturned, but certainly being challenged. And it causes me great grief.
And I think we'll talk about that, about especially the role of the church in the state and the state and the church, because a lot of these governments are doing that in the name of God as well. So I think that deepens the complexity of what we are experiencing when evil is done in the name of God.
Absolutely. And the deep sorrow, to answer your question, Carol, is that my mob, my tribe, Bible-believing Christians in the US but elsewhere, have become part of the cheer squad for authoritarian leaders.
Yeah.
And I feel betrayed. I actually feel like I've lost my tribe. That the very people who have nurtured me in faith and Bible and formation have turned to worship power, authoritarian power. So my sorrow is quite great at the moment with this sense of a loss of my own tribe.
Okay. Oh, so I think at the beginning, at the introduction, you shared a bit about some of the work that you've done. Would you tell me how you found yourself as a leader? Like, what's your journey? What's your leadership journey? And what has leadership taught you so far?
Yes, often younger people say to me, I'd love to be the CEO of World Vision, the president like you. How do I get there? And it always causes me a crisis because I never had any plan that was linear to get to what I did. The truth is I've only ever had enough light to take the next step. And I couldn't see that far ahead. And at this stage of my life, looking back, I go, how did that happen? I never, ever really applied for jobs. Very simply, I started work as a lawyer, doing criminal and matrimonial family law. I found depressing. Every criminal I represented was very repentant on the steps of the court, and I'd keep them out of prison. And so many of them went back to crime. And I thought, I'm not doing any good.
Yeah.
As a lawyer in matrimonial family law, people who once loved each other, had children, had separated, were scratching each other's eyes out, fighting over the house or custody. And I felt, this isn't doing any good. I did law because I believed in justice.
Yeah.
So I, after 3 years, left and went and studied theology to try and understand what justice really was, because just doing legal justice wasn't fulfilling a vocation. I went back to, after a theology degree, to Melbourne, my hometown, in the red light area, a very poor area with lots of homeless kids, mentally ill, crime. I set up a legal practice in a little church. The church had less than 10 people, all elderly people. So I worked as a lawyer pastor. And I found much more my fulfillment working as an advocate, a lawyer, and a pastor. The church grew, the legal practice grew. We started as a church then running social ministries, a house for kids who'd run away from home, a boarding house for mentally ill people who would be on the streets, a street church where we're feeding people breakfast and lunch. And in that ministry, I really did find my calling, that this was who I was meant to be.
Yeah.
And then I became the mayor of the city, that city which had the red light street work. I ran because I was reading my Bible, and Isaiah 65 said, "They shall build houses and live in them. No longer shall they build houses and others live in them." And it was like an electric shock, because the big issue in St Kilda, where the church was, the legal practice, was the number of homeless people. and how people who once could afford to live there with rising rents were being forced out and becoming homeless. They shall build houses and live in them. So I organised a whole group of people politically in my city where I was. I said, I'm going to run for the mayor, for the council, and our platform is what you call social housing, affordable housing.
Yeah.
We're going to charge rich people in the big houses higher rates, and we're going to build or buy social housing for the poor. And we won power, and I became the mayor. And at the first council meeting, I read Isaiah 65. They shall build houses and live in them. No longer shall they build houses and others live in them. We were the first council anywhere in Australia, this is 1991, 92, to actually take ratepayers' dollars for social and affordable housing. And now 15% of all housing stock in St Kilda, where I was mayor, is social or affordable housing for the poor.
You know what's very interesting is our government wants to do social housing, but I don't even understand the concept of social housing as it's been explained by our government. How affordable is affordable? What was because sometimes even the costs, the amounts that they are telling us for us do not sound affordable.
Yeah.
What was the math?
So in Australia, very different to Kenya, there is a much better safety net. So there's universal health.
Yes.
There's, if you're unemployed, a universal unemployment benefit. It's not a lot, but you can just live on it.
Yeah.
If you're homeless or poor, there is a rent subsidy. So social housing actually is for the poorest in Australia, and those benefits do allow them to actually enter into social housing. Look, the poorest in Australia would be richer than, the poorest in Kibera or Matera or some of your slums. So it's a different reality. But we had a lot of homeless, and social housing was for them. I'm going to ask that person to mentor me. I was a lawyer. I was a pastor. I became a mayor. I didn't ever have a person in any one of those fields who I said, that's the leader I want to be like. After being a mayor, was a pastor again, and we started a ministry, Urban Seed, which was for drug-affected poor people, detox centre we set up. And I did that for 10 years, and literally World Vision tapped me on the shoulder and said, will you come and be our CEO? And I went there. So at each point, there hasn't been a mentor leader that I've modelled myself on. But the truth is that the writings of people like Jim Wallace, who was staying out in my house from Sojourners in America, the inspirations of the Dietrich Bonhoeffers, the Martin Luther Kings. I named one of my 3 children Martin after Martin Luther King. They were my inspiration rather than I personally having leadership mentors.
Okay. What is the importance of seeing other people modeling something? What do you think is why do you think that is important? Why do you think it was important for, especially like you said, your influences were Martin Luther King Jr., Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Why is that important?
So I, as a Baptist minister, that's what I trained to be, really had been taught what I would now call a false gospel or half a gospel. It was that the soul is eternal. The most important thing is to get the soul saved. So evangelism, and what's the point of feeding hungry people if they're still going to go to hell? And it was really Baptist ministers like Martin Luther King, Lutherans like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who when I read, I thought, no, that I've been taught a wrong gospel. And so many of us Baptists are preaching that wrong gospel. It's as if, our real interest is the lawyer who asked Jesus two questions. The first question was, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Which is spiritual, but it's individualistic, it's personal, it's otherworldly, as if that's the gospel question. And Jesus isn't even really interested in answering that question. Jesus just says to that lawyer, well, what does the scriptures teach you? And he gives a good answer. Love God with all your heart, love your neighbour as yourself. And Jesus turns to go. But then that lawyer, I think he's a bit nervous. He knows how to love God, tithes, kosher food, sacrifices in the temple. He's not sure about his neighbour. So he asks a second question, and who is my neighbour? This question is social. It's this worldly. It's not individualistic.
Yeah.
And Jesus is really excited about this question. He's not excited about the spiritual question, how do I inherit eternal life? So he tells the whole story of the Good Samaritan. It was really Martin Luther King, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, these people that taught me that actually Christian faith is much more about this worldly than the next world. And it's a false idea I've been often taught and preached that therefore somehow evangelism is really the serious work. Last year in America, 7,000 pastors supporting Trump all signed a letter saying the social gospel is not a gospel. It is only spiritual.
Yeah.
Well, they should listen to the story of the Good Samaritan, and as I then studied and relearnt my faith, I realised, in the 2nd century, Tertullian had said, the body or the flesh is the condition on which salvation hinges. God creates the flesh, the body. Jesus, the Word, comes as flesh. That Jesus is resurrected in the flesh and the body. So if you're actually interested in the body and the flesh, you're going to be interested in health and better sewerage. You're going to be interested in feeding programs.
Yeah.
And this is profoundly the gospel. So Martin Luther King fighting racism, Dietrich Bonhoeffer fighting totalitarianism, much more this worldly, really helped me understand what I think is the gospel.
But someone else will, when we say that, we'll say that we are not bringing souls to Jesus by that. So we are not doing the real work that the gospel has called us to do. What do you have to say about that?
I say I once thought that way, but I then read the Bible. And the Bible does not teach that. The Bible has no notion of a disembodied soul somehow that's trapped in a body that gets saved and plays a harp sitting on a cloud forever and ever and doing daily Bible studies in a place called heaven. What the Bible says is heaven is just the CEO's office. That's where God rules. And it's going to be here on earth. And it's going to be bodily in this body. That this idea of saving souls was always a heresy. It was always a heresy. That the Lord's Prayer, thy will be done on earth as in heaven. Thy kingdom come on earth. And I had grown up with saving souls and getting to heaven, really, which was a gospel of saying, I've booked my ticket to the great Tay-Tay concert in the sky. I'm there. I'm reserved. Nothing else matters about justice here. That's just not the gospel.
Ooh. I'm sure a lot of people disagree with that, but I think one of the conversations is that we need to go back to the scriptures and we need to read the Bible for ourselves as well. So there has been a lot about governance that's Christian. And you've been in leadership. You've been a leader for many people and with many people. What would you say, or what has been your experience of what is there anything like a Christian government?
Great question.
If any, yeah.
The answer is no,
Okay.
absolutely not. When Jesus said, render to Caesar what's Caesar's and render to God what's God's, he was saying there is a profound difference in the spheres of the church and government, and don't confuse them by thinking there can be a Christian government.
Yeah.
The desire of Christians to rule rather than to be a witness is why we're in the mess, and I think, in Trump's America and in even Putin's Russia. So in 2013, I was leading...
And Ruto's Kenya.
And Ruto's Kenya.
Yes.
Well, that's for you to say.
Yes,
I don't know
Ruto's
Kenya so well.
Yes. Yes.
I was in Moscow in 2013 having a meeting with President Putin. I was leading civil society, and we were discussing in his dasher the war in Syria, why he was beating up Russian charities, NGOs, saying they're foreign agents, they're influenced by the West. And Putin was wearing a Christian cross, ex-KGB man wearing a Christian cross. He was fascinated that I was a reverend. And he said to me, I'm telling young Russians to go back to church. I'm giving the church millions of rubles, the Orthodox Church, to build more churches. They need God in their lives. We are a Christian nation. And I'm thinking, ex-KGB President Putin. Now, this is 2013, a year before he marched into Crimea, into there. So I pushed my luck. I said, well, President Putin, that's very good. But why did you punish Pussy Riot, the protest group of singers? Have you heard of Pussy Riot?
No, I've not heard of them.
So they're young Russian women who sing punk, who protest against Putin. Why did you send them to Siberia and for 7-8 years jail? And Putin said, because they sang in St. Saviour's Cathedral and the church was offended. It's blasphemous and blasphemous. We're not going to have that. And I said, sure, the church is the church was offended. But surely a Christian church, President Putin, would say, even if we're offended, the gospel is about forgiveness. We forgive them, don't send them to a concentration camp in Siberia. A look of complete incomprehensibility came over President Putin's face, and he said to me, why would a church ever say that?
Oh, wow.
And I realized the Russian Orthodox Church was just a department of the state so that Putin could say it's a Christian government. In fact, the patriarch there has blessed Putin's war in Ukraine, calling it a holy war. This Christian nationalism in the US, I feel the same thing has happened. The Christians have wanted to rule, and they've said Trump is our protector of Christianity. Trump is our big, strong tool that God is using. And we now are back in power. We are ruling. You know, I often reflect that the very last question that the disciples got to ask Jesus before he ascended to heaven, it's in Acts chapter 1, verses 6 and 7. So if you got one last question before Jesus ascends, make it a good one.
Yeah.
What do they ask? They ask, Lord, is now the time you'll restore the kingdom to Israel? In today's language, that question is now the time, Lord, you'll make Israel great again? Like make America great again, make Russia great again. And Jesus won't have a bar of it. Jesus says, no. I'm not here to make Israel great again. You are to be my witnesses. Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the uttermost parts of the earth. I'm here to make the world great again. All carry the image of God, particularly the poor. That's why I'm here. I think American Christians, in the belief of Christian government, and now with Trump, who purports to be a Christian, they think they're back in power. Jesus ruled that out. No, absolutely no to Christian government.
Oh, and so it begs, like, this conversation also, for me, we had this conversation on Sunday, and I thought it was really important. And I said, we have to speak about it here when we are recording this podcast. Then what does discipleship look like? What is your view of discipleship? And we talked about the private and the public expressions of discipleship as well. And and then there was morality, personal morality, and personal morality within a space of systemic sin as well. Would you speak about that?
Yeah, no, I believe that the gospel unites private discipleship and public discipleship. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "The church is not the master of society. Neither is the church the servant of society. The church is to be the conscience of society." What I've just been saying with Putin's and the Orthodox Church in Russia, or evangelicals who really are saying, Jesus is Lord, but Trump is my president. We're back in power. They think the church is the master of society.
You know, when you say Jesus is Lord, I remember my lecturer saying that what that term, Jesus is Lord, was as a counter to Caesar. Because
Indeed.
Jesus is Lord, Caesar is not.
Yes.
Yet at this moment, we are saying Jesus is Lord, Trump is my president.
Yes. I think it's Christian nationalism, and it's white Christian nationalism. It was largely Catholic, mainline Protestant, evangelical white Christians who have voted for Trump, and I think they've made a profound confusion between thinking he is God's anointed, he is therefore their champion and hero. And you're absolutely right. Why were Christians crucified in the first century? For saying Jesus is Lord, because that meant Caesar is not Lord.
Yeah.
And in 1934, Hitler had been in power just 1 year. Karl Barth and other Christians gathered in a German town called Barmen, 1934, and they wrote the Barmen Declaration. And the Barmen Declaration didn't mention Hitler by name. It just began with this article: God has spoken one word, Jesus Christ. Him alone will we obey. Karl Barth had to flee for his life to Switzerland because Hitler knew exactly, without his name being mentioned, when they said, we alone will obey Jesus Christ, God has spoken one word, that they were relegating Hitler from not being Lord. And the Führer had to be Lord. So I think the mistake is for the church to think it's the master of society. Equally, some of us who are seen on the left of the church, we sometimes are too much the servant of society. We always want to serve and love and turn the other cheek, and all the Beatitudes are the right thing. And sometimes we forget that, serving and loving is absolutely part of the gospel, but the church isn't just the servant of the society. The church is the conscience of the society. To actually be speaking to, at times, criticize the left, at other times to criticize the right. As Jim Wallace says, don't go left, don't go right, go deeper into Jesus. That we will be critical of both. Why? Because we're the conscience, not the servant. and certainly not the master, which is what Christian government idea is all about.
Oh, I love that. That expression. So then, in lieu of that, what does a church being salt and light look like? What does transformation look like? And then, as part of our conversation as well, we had talked about expectations and managing them as we are entering into spaces and into society. Would you talk about that, about transformation? What does that look like? And then the place of expectations, especially when we are leading social change in social movements.
Yeah. So I think the phrase Jesus used, salt and light, is very relevant for our dilemma of utter polarization that we're seeing between left and right. And in America, Republican, Democrat, literally has split churches, split families, split the nation. It is terrifying, the level of polarization. I think when Jesus used the term salt, he was using a very conservative term that resonates with conservative politics. Because salt, by definition, is not seen in the food. It dissolves. But it absolutely conserves and brings out the flavors of the food. And conservatives at their best said, you don't need a lot of change. You just need a little bit of salt, and it can actually have a big influence, and we don't need big dramatics. Light. Jesus said, we're not just salt, we're also light. Light is more a left-wing understanding, because those of us who are natural activists on the left go, there's a lot of darkness here, a lot of corruption, and we're going to flick on the light. And when you flick on the light, it's radical. It's confronting. It says you have to change because you can't now pretend that you haven't seen the injustice, the corruption, the greed. So I think Jesus was very wise saying we are both salt and light. At times we're conserving, we're conservatives. At other times we're radical. We absolutely are radical. So I think the idea of public discipleship is most churches are very good at private discipleship, personal morality, discipline. There is a truth that if I don't drink too much and gamble, I am going to save some more money, build up and be more prosperous, and call it God blessing me because I'm showing private morality and I'm getting ahead. But public morality, public discipleship is equally what the cross and resurrection are about. So Jesus is crucified publicly by the ruler Pontius Pilate, condemned and betrayed really by the Jewish political elite who've handed him over to Pontius. This is public discipleship. And the resurrection is saying something very public has changed fundamentally. A new day has dawned. History swinging on the hinge has changed. We can now live out of the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the poor, love your enemies. That's why Christians for the first 300 years refused to fight in the army. They said, how can we kill another person who carries the image of God? That's public discipleship.
And I'm actually glad that we're having this conversation around the army and enlisting, because it's seen now as the Christian thing to do, to go fight for your country.
Yeah, it's troubling. When it changed, Christians died rather than going into the army for the first 300 years. And that was when the gospel turned the world upside down, because they loved, Jesus was so radical, Carol, so radical. If I could have given Jesus some advice, Carol, I would have said to him, just say, avoid your enemies. That's practical advice. Or if you want to stretch me, say, tolerate your enemies. That stretches me. But Jesus said, love your enemies. Now, that's completely over the top, hysterical. Why did he say it? Because he believed that even my enemy carries the image of God.
Yeah.
How can I kill? So for 300 years, Christians didn't join the army. Constantine becomes emperor. He has the vision
Yes.
of the cross, fight under this cross. He wins. Christians become Christian soldiers. And ever since...
Onward, Christian soldiers.
Onward, and we sing it. Ever since then, we have thought in those militaristic terms. And really the message, the transformative message of a new reality having begun in the resurrection, so we can live as pacifists and love and serve and act, has often been overcome.
Yeah. And so did we talk about the expectations and managing expectations?
You are very good at interviewing.
Yes.
I keep forgetting.
Yes. And also because the reason I want us to talk about it is because we had a conversation before, and there was the dream that you have as a change maker of what it is you want to see. And sometimes you never get to see it, or you see something very little out of the big vision and out of the big dream. And sometimes you get disheartened. And so how do you deal with that? So transformation, what does transformation look like for you? And how do we manage the expectations?
Yeah.
Or is it necessary? Because in terms of relationships and friendships, I don't believe in managing expectations. I believe in having expectations of people. But I think in terms of social work and the community engagement, I think that really does make sense and resonate. So I'm curious to hear from you.
Yeah. I think I said to you that the trick in life is managing expectations.
Yes.
If they're not high enough, you don't stretch yourself. If they're so high and unachievable, you crush people and they get disappointed and they give up trying. And I think good leaders are good at pitching expectations that stretch, and you have some wins so you can keep going, but aren't so utopian that people will just go, this is ridiculous, I'm out, and lose all hope. So I think that was the conversation. And I think it's more a conversation of leaders. Look, in the justice world, I would have said 15 years ago, we are marching toward more Millennium Development Goals, lifting millions out of poverty. I had sort of utopian expectations. And now we're going backwards again. And because my expectations were so high, I must admit, I was starting to get shattered, feel really bad, and losing hope. And I had to remind myself, as Desmond Tutu taught us, that hope isn't a feeling, hope is a choice. We choose to hope, even when our expectations have been disappointed. And that's the place I'm sort of in at the moment, having to choose to hope.
Then as we're all coming to the end of this I feel like we've talked about so many things because it's important. I'm trying to put all the important stuff that we've been speaking about as you've been here for the week. But one of the key pointers that we've had was on the role of women in the liberation struggle and in the work that you have done and in all the places that you've seen. What has been your experience when women have been in leadership or women have been at the forefront of the liberation struggle?
Look, when Paul wrote neither male nor female in the first century, we should have recognized then, and history tells us that most of the churches in those first 200 or 300 years that saw the gospel spread so effectively were household churches led by women. And yet we then wrote women out of the story and rewrote it as a male using 1 Timothy, women can't speak and preach. using wrong exegesis. We wrote it out. And even my hero, Martin Luther King, when he made the I Have a Dream speech, there was a woman called Gloria Steinem in the crowd supporting Martin Luther King. And she noticed that there wasn't one woman speaking on the platform. Gloria Steinem became a mother, a founder of feminism. She left that rally and she said half the population weren't even represented in speaking roles at the civil rights movement. So this has been a terrible blind spot. Look, the truth is that women have far better EQ than men. They are far more strategic in my leadership development work. They in terms of heart, because, you say World Vision, which is child-focused, it's women who really are the child-focused ones. And when they're in leadership, the policies show and it tells. So absolutely, women in leadership is fundamental to any transformation we're going to see.
All right. And what examples? I loved the example that you shared about something that the parliamentarians, leaders did with the parliamentarians. Could you share that?
Yeah. So in Australia, we train women pastors and take them to our capital, Canberra, to meet the Prime Minister and the parliamentarians. And I've often taken male church leaders who are self-important, stick out their chest, say how big their church is, and the politicians are bored and use them, manipulate them. When you take women pastors, because they've got emotional intelligence, they ask the politicians about their family. They say at the end, can we pray for your children? I've often seen male powerful politicians in tears when they have been lobbied by women who are there lobbying for the poor of the world. They're lobbying to say we've got to increase Australian aid. We've got to deal with climate change. So they're doing public discipleship. But their private discipleship, the quality and grace of their interactions is amazing. It's so much better than men.
Okay. All right. That's a good way to wind up this conversation. But before we do, is there something that you feel that you wanted to speak about in this conversation
I feel
that we haven't?
I feel like you have covered the whole of the cosmos. Congratulations.
All right. So thank you so much, Tim, for this time, for the work of service that you have done. I read somewhere that in 2014, you were voted as Australia's living treasure.
That's right. I'm in one of 100 national living treasures.
What does that mean even?
Oh, they had a vote in Australia to say who are we, sports people and leaders and writers, but you could vote for anyone. Who are the 100 Australians we're most proud of, and I was one of them.
And that is a testament as a result of your work and service to people. And I pray and I hope that you continue in the service of people for the least of this, and even to the highest of places, because you've been able to go to the highest political offices and are also at home with the most impoverished. So thank you for serving. Thank you for being an instrument of God's justice. And God bless you.
It's been an absolute pleasure. God bless you.
All right. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in, for listening. I've been your host, Karo Nganga, founder Msingi Trust and host Msingi Talks. And it's been an amazing conversation of learning. So as we keep listening, as we keep sharing this podcast, always remember to keep doing justice. Kwaheri. Bye.